All right. Hello, everybody. See you guys starting to trickle in. So we will get started. My name is Brianna Coma, and I'm with Conservation Nebraska. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We're so excited to have Jody with us and teach us all about insects today. I hope your gardens are ready for it. A couple of reminders before we get started. Your cameras are off and your microphones are muted so you cannot be seen or heard. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat box or the Q&A, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. This is being recorded, so if you have any miss anything or you want to share it with anybody, it'll be on Conservation Nebraska's YouTube channel in just a couple of weeks. Lastly, there will be a pre and post poll that will pop up on your screen in just a couple of minutes. These polls really help Conservation Nebraska to improve on future webinars and events. They're a really simple way to kind of engage and help us understand what you guys are interested in. So, with all that being said, let's dig into the world of entomology with Jody Green. She is the extension educator with Nebraska Extensions in Douglas-Sarpy Counties. She holds a doctorate in entomology from Purdue. She enjoys sharing the curiosity of nature and fostering better relationships between humans and insects. Now I will hand it off to Jody to get us started.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining. I want to thank Conservation Nebraska for hosting and Brianna for asking me to come today. As she mentioned, I am an educator with Nebraska Extension, and I'm located in Omaha. I am going to be talking about the most common vegetable pests, and this is a kind of a top 10 list according to me. So it depends where you are, if this will relate, but most of us in Nebraska grow the same type of things that grow well here. So it's also things that have come in through email for me to identify, from master gardener, phone calls, social media, backyard farmer, all of those things. So it's really geared toward Eastern Nebraska. So if you have some concerns of where this is, that's where we're located. And then I just want to mention extension. There are several entomologists employed with UNL, and they may be involved with research or teaching, but I'm extension. And so what I do is I bring the research to the people, and I'm located in the community. So I urge you to reach out to your local extension office, because there are likely some programs or resources that can help you make better decisions in your life. And it doesn't have to all be about bugs. It can be all about food, nutrition, horticulture, all of those things. So today I'm going to talk about bugs in the garden. And, oh, I see the poll. Should I just put it somewhere?
Yeah, you could just X out of it. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. I don't want to shut it down for you.
Nope, you're good.
Okay, so today's lessons, we're going to cover a couple things. We're going to go through the common vegetable garden insect pests, and these are gardens like a backyard garden, so a small scale type of plot. We're going to look at some insects that you may see, how to recognize them, the different life stages that you will see, the various host plants that they attack. And then we'll talk about integrated pest management, because the whole point is to try to manage them, right? So after this presentation, you should be able to identify some common garden pests, understand what integrated pest management is, and I will call it IPM as well. And then, come up with some alternatives or add-on management techniques other than pesticides. And when Brianna first asked me to do this talk, we were talking about natural pest control. And a lot of the things that I'll cover in this integrated approach are non-chemical. So hopefully it's something that you can choose from all the options that are here. But I do work pretty closely with master gardeners in Douglas County to grow food for a local food pantry. And so we've employed a lot of the IPM techniques there, and we've had some pretty good success, which has led us to be able to donate more food to those in need. So it's not really going to be heavy biology and behavior of insects, but I'm going to mention things that are going to be important when it comes to managing these, these pests in your vegetable garden. So I'm going to talk about insects and how they grow or develop. So they all start off as eggs, and then they go through metamorphosis. And there's usually two types that we'll talk about. So this one is incomplete metamorphosis, and bugs go through it and other insects. And the stages are egg to nymph to adult. And so here's an egg of a brown marmorate stink bug. We probably are familiar with these because they are coming out of our house and we've seen them on any sunny day throughout the winter. They are pests inside, aren't they? But as they emerge, they're going to be these tiny, we call them first instar nymphs. So you can see this life cycle here. They undergo certain amount of molts. And so they have an exoskeleton, so they've got to molt or shed their skin to get to the next stage and develop. But you can see that as nymphs, they just look like very small versions of the adult. When they're adults, they will have wings. So adult insects, if they are winged insects, because we do have insects that don't have wings, if they are winged, they will only be winged at the adult stage. And in the adult stage is the only time they're able to reproduce. But you can see here, this is incomplete metamorphosis. And they also call it gradual metamorphosis, but these are nymphs, smaller versions of the adult. But, you know, they all have the same mouth part and they very similarly have the same habitat. In the opposite form, we've got complete metamorphosis, and we're all very familiar with, you know, the life stages of the butterfly. And so they go through 4 life stages, you know, egg, larvae, pupa, and adult. And here I'm going to show the life cycle of swallowtail butterfly, a black swallowtail. So this is one of the youngest, you know, larvae, and these larvae, they'll go through the molts to become larger, more mature caterpillars. And you can see there's so much variety when it comes to the black swallowtail. They're also very cool. You can see as tiny little first instar larvae, they kind of look like poop. That's their defense mechanism. As they grow up, you know, they will go into pupation. And so they're not going to be eating or moving at that time. And I put this in here of the black swallowtail Osmitarium. If you ever bug this bug, it will extend its Osmitarium, which is a defense mechanism. It will try to back up and touch you, and it smells and it's kind of sticky. So it's pretty cool. A lot of people don't know about it, but it's very interesting. I allow myself to bother a caterpillar every now and then just to see this amazing thing. But anyway, going back to metamorphosis of butterflies or anything that goes through complete metamorphosis, out will come a butterfly or a moth or an adult. And you can see it looks very different. So the larvae or immature stage looks very different from the adult. So this means that they have different mouth parts, they have different forms, they have different functions, and sometimes we don't really relate that being the same insect. The reason why this is a problem when it comes to garden and insect pests is because everybody loves butterflies. But if we go around killing all the caterpillars that are eating our fennel or our parsley and our dill, then we are essentially getting rid of the pollinators or the beneficial insects that we want to see. So sometimes it's a little bit of give and take, what you're willing to put up with. And, you know, that's why identification is very important. And knowing what type of metamorphosis this insect will go through can be helpful when it comes to pest management, because you can figure out, you know, when that life stage is that the pest is damaging, so you can stop it before then, or you can figure out how to alter that environment to slow down or speed up that life cycle, right? So, and also knowing what stage they overwinter in, because, you know, I mean, for right now, it's been winter, it seems like, for a really long time. But anyway, what is a pest? And so there are many definitions of what a pest is, but basically, you know, they can be damaging, they can ruin homes, they can ruin health, they can be a nuisance, they can make things not pretty. So aesthetic pests, they are basically just unwanted, and they can be insects, they can be vertebrates, they can be fungi, they can be various pathogens, right? They can be a variety of things. Basically, a pest is someone that bugs you, and I'm a pest expert. So basically, a lot of what I do here is help people solve their pest problems, and it's not usually in the garden. My background is actually urban entomology, so termites, bed bugs, roaches, and ants are probably my favorite. But today we're going to focus on insect pests in the vegetable garden. So most speakers will talk about the pests, and then they will blast through the last 5 minutes talking about management. I'm going to talk a little bit of management now and introduce you to the concepts of IPM, because then I want you to get a grasp of it, so you will think about these pests as I talk about them and consider their biology and behavior and how it relates to being able to manage them better. And when I say manage, well, we know that we've lost control, right? We can't control everything. We don't want to get rid of anything or altogether. We might want to, but we can't. And so we need to manage them the best that we can. So below the levels where you're not going to harvest anything, economically, you don't want to spend money treating all the time when you could just buy things at the farmer's market. You want it to be economical. You want it to be safe for humans. And we call those non-targets, humans, people, pets, the environment, all the things that we are not trying to manage or hurt, right? We all belong to this ecosystem, so we want to treat it well. But this integrated approach combines multiple methods or tactics or types of control. And it's kind of hard to think about off the bat. So I'm gonna teach you a little bit about these. And it's gonna minimize risk to the non-targets, but it should target the pest, right? So cultural control is one of them. This is kind of like us humans doing something, changing our behavior. A lot of times it's going to be more work for us because we need to change that environment so pests are unlikely to survive there. Mechanical controls, this is when you're using something physical like an object or a trap or some kind of item that stops the pest from getting to your plant. Biological control, this is basically using living organisms to control the pests. And so we call those beneficial organisms because not all insects are bad. There is genetic control. So there are some, genetically engineered plants that help with pest management. And then we can also talk about chemical control. So everything is a chemical. And so even if you're using something that's natural or, biologically, a biological chemical. These are all types of things that you're using. And a pesticide can be natural, organic, synthetic, man-made. And a pesticide is defined as anything that kills, controls, or repels a pest. And pests, of course, can be all different types of things. When it comes to insects, those are going to be insecticides. So insecticides are used to kill, control, repel insects. So it is involved in an integrated approach, but you don't necessarily have to use it. You can use it in combination, or you can not use it at all, or you can use it in different forms. And we'll talk about that later. But that is in general what integrated pest management is. So we will think about that while we go through our pests. So these are the top 10 pests of the vegetable garden. And remember, this depends on your location and what kind of vegetables you have growing in your garden. You're not going to have some of these pests if you're not growing some of the plant families there. Again, the garden is an ecosystem, so there's a lot of interactions going on that it might not be evident towards you. But if you, see a certain pest, you may have it, but your neighbor might not. Right? There's a lot of different variables. So the takeaway message about IPM is that, you can manage those common pests in the friendliest way to everybody. And so you want to consider this. And being Earth Day this week on Friday, we really want to consider everything when we're trying to manage our pests. So the number one to me and what I've been seeing throughout the years is the squash vine borer. So squash grows really, really well here, and people grow a lot of zucchini, summer squash, and then we also do a lot of winter squash. So their host plants are going to be those cucurbits. So it's going to be squash. They love zucchini. Pumpkin, gourds, melons, so any of those. And if you can think back, you may have seen the damage and you may have had a lot of loss in your small garden plots. These are active from June to August, and what they are is actually a moth. So we think about the squash vine borer, it's boring in the vine, right? So it's looking like this. It's looking like a worm. This is a caterpillar because the adult version is a moth. So they overwinter in the pupa form in the garden soil. So right now, I would say it's still kind of winter, right? Well, it's spring, but it's not warm enough for them to emerge. So where they are right now is going to be in the garden, in the soil. So if you had squash plants growing in your garden last year, you may very well have squash vine borer pupae in your soil. Normally here, we're considered more north. There can be one generation a year. In some other places, there may be two. And you can see here, there's the moth here, and you can see some of the eggs that it's laying. And she lays the eggs singly, but really close to the base of that vine. And so she lays those eggs, they emerge as larvae, and they bore into the stem. And what they do is feed where we can't see them, right? And so it's really hard to get to them. It's really hard to know that they're even in there until it's too late. And what it looks like sometimes is this dead or wilting plant. It seems like it just happened overnight, but because they're feeding on that stem, they're really girdling that vascular system. And so that plant just kind of falls apart and dies if it's not caught sooner. And there's not just one larvae in there. There's usually multiple. And from what I read, there was up to 142 larvae removed from a single plant at one time. Can you imagine that? But so they're eating that plant tissue. Sometimes you'll see the hole that the larvae bored into. Sometimes you'll see kick out or frass, what we call it. Kind of looks like this yellowish goo, sawdusty type thing. If you cut into the vine, you'll actually be able to see this giant kind of chunky caterpillar. So in terms of metamorphosis, we're thinking it's a moth. It's going to go through this complete metamorphosis. Where is it right now? It's going to be under the ground. So what can we do about that? Think about IPM. What can we do about that pupa? When will it emerge? It's going to be, close to June when you have those plants growing. So when you put those plants in the ground, that's when you're going to start, actively looking for those. What is the damaging stage? The adult's actually a pollinator. It feeds on the flowers. You may see it in your flower garden. The damaging stage is going to be that larvae. So what can we do to stop it? Think about IPM. So we'll go on to number 2, the squash bugs. And I get a lot of calls about these. They are pests of the same host plants, right? Those cucurbits. And many times you will have squash vine borer and squash bugs. So that double whammy, getting fed on the outside and feeding on the inside. So these are active June to August, and it looks like they have ongoing, nymphs and adults together. And because, they lay these eggs in these clusters like this, these kind of red elliptical football shapes in clusters. When they do emerge, they emerge at one time, or they hatch at one time, and you'll get hundreds of squash bugs. These guys have piercing, sucking mouth parts. So they are sucking the plant juice from the leaves and the plant. The plant is going to have like this yellow stippling of the leaves, but honestly, you will see them because there are so many of them. They really do multiply rapidly, and they're very secretive. When it comes to, the metamorphosis I talked about, why this is important, because they are damaging throughout their life, immature to adult. And they right now are actually adults hiding somewhere close to your garden. So, some of the things you can do right now are look around under planters or landscape timbers, things like that. You may see several adult squash bugs hiding out. They become active when it gets warm and you put your plants out. They'll fly away to other people's plants if they don't have squash plants there. So that's what makes them very difficult, because they are a pest all through that season. Number 3, I've got is cucumber beetles. We've got the striped variety and the spotted variety. You may see them in flowering plants as well. They're pretty attractive beetles. They're yellow with either spots or stripes. They're active pretty early, so active May and June, and they pretty much go throughout the season, but you'll see them on your cucurbits, and especially cucumbers. And what they can do is vector or transmit bacterial wilt. So they actually transmit a pathogen that cannot be stopped once it's infected, and that plant just wilts. And then the adults, they will chew on some of the plants, but it's usually not as significant as what happens with the bacterial wilt. But you may see multiple, you may see them like this, several, and then both species on the same plant. If you grow cabbage in your garden, you may have a variety of cabbage caterpillars. And I put number 4, all of these 3 together because oftentimes they are all 3 on the cabbage. And it's sometimes hard to identify each one. So this is why I have a video of all 3 of them together. And if you saw that, this is the imported cabbage worm, and that turns into this cabbage white butterfly. So a very common butterfly that we see. So it's a velvet furry caterpillar. This one here, you can see its body loops around. So this one's a cabbage looper, and this kind of skittish tiny one there, that's a diamondback moth. So you will see all of these on your cabbage or Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, kale, all of those in the Brassicaceae family. Here is what they look like, each individually as larvae or caterpillars, and this is what their pupa will look like. So this one's the one that turns out to be a butterfly. These ones turn out to be moths that you could see were not that attractive. So, you know, it's really hard to see them sometimes because they're camouflaged, but a lot of times you will see their poop. So that could be a giveaway. Another one that does the most damage, I think, to cabbage is going to be cutworms, because they get right into the head of the cabbage and start doing damage, and you will see a lot of poop, which we call frass. So I'm going to call it frass from now on. But they can really eat a number of plants. So it's not just cabbage. They are called cutworms because they like to cut plants like at the base too. So if you ever see some of your plants just cut straight across and not eaten, those would also be cutworms. And these are active throughout the growing season. They overwinter in the pupa in the soil, so similar to those other caterpillars, and they may have several generations a year. But that's my hand there. You can see that they're pretty large sized caterpillars. So they'll defoliate leaves, buds, stems, and you can see this cabbage here, the damage. That caterpillar was right in the center of that. Another large caterpillar that we see, and some people get really excited about, some people don't, are these giant hornworms. And you can actually buy these. I think you can buy 5 for $9.99 at pet store as feeders or as entertainment. But if you grow tomatoes, you may see these show up, and they're so camouflaged that you actually may see just their frass. But they're active throughout the summer growing season, especially of tomatoes. There may be, there's 2 species there that could be a tomato hornworm or tobacco hornworm. They both feed on tomato. They overwinter as pupa in the soil. So if you are digging and you find a fairly large size pupa, that may be a sphinx moth, and it may be a hornworm. They've got 1 generation a year, and you can see, you know, this was picked off of 1 tomato plant. So it can be severe when you've got a lot of tomatoes. This is why you want to look and scout whenever you can to protect your plants. And they'll take bites right out of the tomato fruit. They'll defoliate leaves and stem. And if you try to keep them as pets, they eat a lot. So this is what they look like. The difference is, if anyone's interested, tobacco hornworm's got 7 stripes, and the tomato hornworm has 8. They call them chevrons. But sometimes if you look at the tip of the horn, and the horn is not on the head, it's not a unicorn, the horn's actually on the rear end. So the tomato hornworm will have a black horn sometimes, and the tobacco hornworm will have the red horn sometimes. So it's kind of the opposite that you would think, right? Because tomato being red, that would be nice, but it's not. It's the opposite. This is what they look like when they become a pupa. And this is what the pupae looks like. So it's very big, if you can see it, and they do kind of move around when they're in there. And when they emerge, they emerge into these giant moths, and you'll be able to tell the difference because of the number of orange spots on the side. But again, sometimes all you see is their frass. There are some tomatoes on this plant. Obviously, I wasn't paying attention at this time in this container tomatoes, but if I looked around, look at all of this frass, and they've got very interesting little frass. It looks like little tiny grenades. So number 7 are flea beetles. They will feed on many things, eggplant especially, and you can tell that it's going to be flea beetles because they look like these, all these tiny little holes, little shot holes in the leaves. And a lot of times the plants will recover if they're older and healthier. If they're younger seedlings, it can be kind of iffy, but they're called flea beetles because they have really large hind jumping legs. I mean, they're pretty tiny, but they have the ability to jump. So that's why they're called flea beetles. There's a number of species that, specialize on different things, but eggplant, radishes, peppers, spinach, tomatoes, potatoes, you name it, they may have flea beetles on there. But if you have a lot of flea beetles, you may want to transplant larger seedlings so that they're not susceptible to dying. Number 8 is bean leaf beetles. These really will destroy small bean plants. So they are pests of legumes. So green beans, soybeans, clover, other weeds too. The trickiest thing about these guys is that when you're looking for them, they play dead, fall down off the plant, and you won't be able to see it. So if you've had bean plants in the past that look like this or this, you may have had bean leaf beetles, but anytime you come near or start crunching up the mulch, they fall off. So what you want to do is try to scout different times of day and really sneak up on them to see what they are, and just know that they are there pretty early in this season when you put those beans out. The adults overwinter in the leaf litter. They're really hard to find. I've never seen any in there, but they're already under there. They will defoliate those young plants, but when they get bigger, they may recover. So if you're going to do any treatments, it's going to be pretty early, or you can, consider the different timing, planting earlier or later for those plants. But the trickiest thing is that they will fall off the plant and hide. Asparagus beetles, if you are into growing asparagus, and it seems to grow really well here in Nebraska, you may see 2 different kinds of beetles. So you'll see these ones and this. They're just so cool looking, but they kind of do a number on asparagus. And then we've got the spotted asparagus beetle. So the common and spotted. Sometimes you will see the spears of the asparagus start curling or curving in a weird way, and that's due to the asparagus beetles. And as larvae, they look like this. So they look like we call beetle larvae grubs, but they're very squishy. They're a type of leaf beetle, and they have really squishy bodies, and that's what they look like. They have a lot of predators. You'll see ants come and eat them. You'll see wasps eat them as well. But they will overwinter in leaf litter. So they're kind of already there. And usually you don't move around your asparagus too much. So you may be seeing these. You'll also see scarring and browning of some of those asparagus spears. The best thing to do is try to pick them off when you can, or tap them into soapy water. Oh, and I just want to say, I will mention the dropping into soapy water a lot, because that's a non-chemical method. But it's not the same as spraying with dish soap. So I would never recommend doing that, because you don't want to kill your plants. But when you are wanting to, kill an insect, it's best to just drop them in soapy water. In water, some of them will live, but the soapy water is not good for them to survive because of the waxy cuticle and, breaking the surface tension, all that. So you want to make sure you've got a little bit of dish soap in there. Blister beetles are another problem. A lot of times these come in all together like this, and overnight they can just feed and feed and feed. So you won't see anything. If they're not present, there's no reason to treat. And what you can do is also handpick these off, but you will want to wear gloves, because they do have a toxin that is not good. It will cause blisters on your skin. But they love eggplant, things in the nightshade family, other greens. I'm pretty sure that was tomatoes, and then this was eggplant over here. But you can see that they come in large numbers and they eat a lot. They can completely defoliate a garden that's on someone's balcony overnight. So, check on those every day. I know this is the top 10 list, but I'm going to go for 11, and I'm going to add in Japanese beetles because everybody asks me about these. They can feed on over 300 different species of plants, and they will feed in things in the vegetable garden. I've seen them eating okra. I've seen them eating sweet potato plants. A lot of times it's just the foliage, and it's not too big of a problem on sweet potato, the potatoes will be fine. So you have to just pick and choose what the real damage is when it's going to affect your harvest. But picking them off and dropping them in soapy water is the best way to deal with Japanese beetles when they start to emerge in June, because when they feed on that plant releases volatiles that signals to other beetles to come there. So it always seems like no matter what plant it is, it's whatever the beetles get to first and you don't pick them off, that's what they will enjoy the most. And I've seen them eating many different things. So, trying to plant things or pull things out because Japanese beetles like it is not always an option in all cases. But you can see that they do a number on a lot of things. They love peaches. This is, one of my peaches in my peach tree, but you can see it's a problem, right? And, with Japanese beetles, their life cycle is such that they're only above ground for 2 months of the whole entire year. So, treating those adults is going to be very difficult. So, they emerge in June, they're active July and August, they lay eggs in the soil, and then they're kind of, gone in the fall. So, it's important to know their life cycle so you don't waste a lot of time and money treating them where they are not. So now we're going into the integrated pest management part. And so we're going to talk about how we're going to manage these in our garden. So the first thing we need to do is learn how to scout for them. So we want to make sure that even now that you're thinking about these pests, like what are you planting? What are the insects that are going to be coming for your crops, right? So you want to start early. The easiest way to manage these things are when they're small, or before they start laying eggs, if they are adults, or when they're adults before they start doing the damage. And one of the things you can do, especially for caterpillars and pupae in the ground, is check growing degree days. So insects, they're cold-blooded, or their life depends on the temperature around them. So they develop due to growing degree days. So they're kind of like heat units. Right now, we have not accumulated a lot of heat units for the season. I think when I looked today, it was like 63 growing degree days. Just to keep that in mind, for bagworms, let's say it's like 600 and 900 before caterpillars emerge. For squash vine borer, they will emerge around 900 growing degree days. And so check the growing degree days. Researchers and scientists have found, how many heat units it takes. And so in that way, you can figure out, when the time is to start scouting. So you're not doing it every day, all year around. You're just figuring out when they will emerge and become active before they start laying eggs, right? And so use all the tools that you have. Bring a cell phone, take photos. You can put that into iNaturalist to get them identified. You can, ask a master gardener. You can send it to your local extension office, collect it, collect some of the damage, figure out what it is that you're dealing with, because you don't want to treat something that's not going to be, effective on that particular pest. And even, organic pesticides, if they're not geared or labeled for or used for the right type of insect, it's not going to work. And an example of that is sawflies. They look just like caterpillars. So people want to use, BT on that, which is an organic, but that's not going to work because the BT is used specifically for caterpillars. So ones that grow up to be moths or butterflies, not ones that turn into little wasps, which are what sawflies are. Scouting for pests, again, the time of day. Sometimes things are nocturnal or things are going to be more active when it's not as hot. So try scouting at different times of the day to catch those pests, because sometimes we just can't figure out what it is, right? So you want to do that. You want to be thorough, not only just look at the plant like this, but you want to look under the leaves, underside of the leaves always. You want to look at the flowers, look at the stems, check your soil, look at all of those things, even nearby. A lot of things are going to hide outside of the garden or under cardboard or wood or planters or things like that. Look for, your unhealthy plants. If they look sick, look for the frass, look for stippling, look for eggs, larvae, If you find little cocoons in the soil, try to figure out what that could have been, what was planted there, and also adults, and also natural enemies. So if you see things that feed like ladybugs, if you see a lot of ladybugs, there's probably some small soft-bodied insects there. So identification is number 6 here. So you want to properly identify that, because sometimes they're not a pest. Maybe it's a good bug. And then work to create an effective IPM plan. And so now I'm going to go through those different components of IPM and different types of control in a little more detail and gear it towards some of the pests that we talked about. So cultural control is non-chemical, and it includes practices to make the garden less favorable. And I'm not going to read all of this. We're going to just get into some of them. So, we always talk about garden sanitation. If you ever listen to Backyard Farmer or any of your educators in horticulture, they'll say sanitation. What's sanitation? We think about being clean, but in a garden, sanitation means weeding. It means mulching. It means cleaning up the garden in the fall. It means cleaning up the garden in the spring to remove places where they're going to hide, where they're going to overwinter, where they're, where diseases or things are going to stay and come back. And so this was under a log near the garden in some leftover mulch. I flipped it over, and all the squash bugs were hiding in there. So that was in November. I just took a bucket of soapy water and killed all those squash bugs. And so I think about that, and this coming spring or summer, whenever it happens, when these squash bugs know that our plants are out there, they'll just start mating and laying eggs. So I've already wiped out some of these adults there. And so one of the things that you want to do at the end of the growing season is, clean up those those things that are out there to make sure things aren't hiding in that residue. Another thing you can do is crop rotation. It's very hard when you have a small plot of land, but using it and changing the locations of what you're planting will help. And when we talked about, caterpillars, that's what it's going to help for, because this is what that stage, that pupal stage looks like, and it's under the soil. And so if you plant right on top of that and they're emerging, they're like, oh, great, this is exactly what I want to eat. If you're moving things around where they can't readily find it, maybe you'll suffer less damage. And, in a perfect world, you would want to change this every 3 years. So if you had so many bugs in 1 year, squash bugs, for instance, you may want to not plant squash 1 year, or, if you don't plant it for 3 years, all those squash bugs will be gone. So crop rotation, that's how it works, just to try to eliminate some of those bugs and reduce that pressure that's there from years and years of planting the same things. Cultural control also includes timing, when you're going to plant things, what size or how big you're going to plant the plant, if you're going to plant by seed or, transplant seedlings, because when there's really heavy, high pest pressure, you're not going to want to put out your youngest, tenderest little seedlings, right? Because that's going to kill your plants. So there's that. And also, if there's enough time, you can grow a whole second crop in the amount of time that you have. So, squash bugs might have wiped out most of your, early squash. Plant a second set if you have time to do that, and you may get a really good harvest. Cultural control also includes choosing the right type of plants that are less susceptible to pests. There's a lot of research on varieties of different vegetables that are more resistant. And an example here is in one of the gardens that we had, they had a lot of like a whole red raspberry, plot there, and it was totally eaten by Japanese beetles. So what they did was remove all those, and they planted black raspberries. And the last couple of years, there's been no problems with the black raspberries, and they've had really good harvest to donate. And it was just from choosing a different type of berry. When it comes to squash, there's research that shows that, some of these are resistant to squash bugs. So, but are not, some of the winter squashes are less susceptible. So if you want a lot of squash and you can grow that, that might be an option. Another thing that you can do is plant a trap crop. So you are intentionally planting something that's more attractive to the pest. So in terms of actually the cucumber beetles, both striped and spotted, the squash bugs and the squash vine borer, it's been found that the blue Hubbard squash, and they are very strange. We just planted them last year. These giant squash, these blue Hubbard squash, are the most attractive to all 4 of those insects. So if you are strategically planting these, then the squash bugs and the vine borer, they will go to this plant. And so what you can do, you have the option of picking those plants out or picking those bugs off those plants, treating those with an insecticide, and that way, reducing that population so it doesn't get to your cash crop or the one that you are interested in. Last year, we didn't treat the crop, so we had a lot of damage to the blue Hubbard, but we also actually got to harvest some of them too. But we're still working it out, but that's another way to do something that doesn't involve chemicals to be able to trap that pest. So now I'm going to talk about biological control. And I talked about how it uses a living organism to control pests. And so sometimes it's hard to think about that. But everything kind of has a natural enemy out there. And I do have another talk that's all about beneficials and natural enemies that we don't think about. But they're also insects. And so they're susceptible to broad spectrum insecticides. When we spray for different things, whether it's, mosquitoes or squash bugs or anything, we can be affecting some very beneficial predators, pollinators, parasitoids, all of those things. A lot of bugs out there perform free pest control for us. So we want to increase natural enemies where we can. So sometimes it means, planting some more flowers and bringing them in. But that's why identification is important, because you want to know which ones are good and which ones are bad. Then there's a lot of biorational products. So as I mentioned, BT, so that's, derived from a bacteria. There's also things that are derived from soil microorganisms like spinosad. There are beneficial, fungi, and also nematodes, which are little tiny worms that will take care of pests too. So again, good bugs and bad bugs. And we all know about, ladybugs, they're larvae and they're adult. They take care of aphids and other soft, small bodied pests. We've got, wasps, and we've got earwigs, things that, could be good and bad. But there are so many generalist predators in our garden that we don't take the time to appreciate. This wheel bug, we've been seeing a lot of them lately. They're really big bugs. People mistake them for spiders, but they will eat Japanese beetles. So that's great. We've got a predatory stink bug that is here eating squash bug nymphs, praying mantids. Some people like them, they don't like them, but this one's eating a cucumber beetle. We can't really tell them what to eat, right? So generalist predators, they just eat it. They just catch it and eat it. But ants, a lot of people don't like ants, but they take care of a lot of larvae for us and eggs. Other things, predators, parasites, parasitoids, these tiny little wasps. This is a wasp laying eggs. Laying an egg in an asparagus beetle egg. So what happens when I'm talking about parasitoids, and these are all little wasps, this wasp's on this imported cabbage worm, and these are wasps coming out of these cocoons. These are called parasitoids because they do lay their egg on or near the host, and then their larvae go into the body of the host and consume the insides, the non-vital organs first, and then they will emerge. So one that most people know about is the hornworm parasitoid. So if you've seen those juicy hornworms and you see them covered in these white cocoons, that's natural enemies. That's, beneficial insects. So they have their life cycle. They come out of those cocoons as tiny, tiny little wasps. And here is, I believe, a time-lapse video of the wasps emerging. So the caterpillar, I wouldn't say it was fine, but it's still, moving around. It didn't make it. And so if you see this, I wouldn't recommend pulling them all off. It's kind of, the circle of life, but this is that little, the little wasp that comes out of it. Very tiny. but there is actually probably a parasitoid wasp for, many different pests. Okay, so getting into mechanical control, this is also non-chemical. This is the one where I told you uses objects or items or nets or traps to manage or control pests. So one of those ways I talked about hand picking, going through and brushing bugs off into soapy water, or just reducing the mating pairs, the egg layers, or even the eggs. So what I do in the garden is go around, and when I see those eggs, so these are squash bug eggs, I just take them and I rip that part of the leaf off. I used to take scissors. You remove those. I think you could definitely remove like 300 to 400 eggs in a single day. And sometimes you look at the plant and I can see that female laying the eggs, and then I'll take her and put her in soapy water as well. So, sometimes people use duct tape. They've used different things, but, hand picking or squishing, there's nothing wrong with that. It's non-chemical, right? For mechanical control, you can also install these floating row covers. The only thing is that if you have plants that require pollination, so, the use of pollinators and bees, you want to make sure you pull that back when there's blooms there so that the bees can pollinate it. But in stages like this, when it doesn't come, when it's not a caterpillar that's coming out of the ground from the pupa, this is a good way to protect your crop. So, for cabbage or whatnot, you can do that. Mechanical control also, it has some barriers. So it looks really weird, but one of the ways that you can slow down squash vine borer from laying eggs on the stem is by wrapping it with aluminum foil. And then this here, they call it like a cardboard collar. That's to protect that plant from being cut down from a cutworm. So the cutworm emerges and it can't like get up over this cup. So this is mechanical control. Seems very silly, but this is a form of control in your garden. Another thing you can do to monitor or scout is put out these yellow bowls of water, and they're attracted to it. So there's a lot of things that are attracted to it. So you might catch some bees too, but you'll be able to catch like squash vine borer or anything that's out there. There is also pheromone traps. I've got a couple here that I bought from somewhere online, but it's a squash vine moth trap and a cucumber beetle trap. We're going to try that this year to see if we can catch some cucumber beetles. And I don't know, sometimes it's just to intercept them while they're looking for a mate, or other times it may just be to monitor that they're there and that we should keep an eye on things. So I do want to mention chemical control because that is part of an integrated approach when, in cooperation with the other methods, or, there are botanical products, there are naturally occurring products, there's neem oil, there's different organics, there's pyrethrins. So they're all different levels of what will work, but you have to think about the life stages that these pests are in, and also what is best for you. So there's a number of things, but I will show you this chart here. So when it comes to what the product is, or the active ingredient, or the type of insecticide, the ones that are going to be more, I would say, more organic or safer, for the environment, they're going to have to be reapplied. So it's not like a one and done type of situation, right? So when you look at, neem oil, you're going to have to apply that several days. Whereas if you were using a synthetic pyrethroid, and if you are using any pesticides, please read and follow the label. And, it's going to be more often, and you're not going to want to do that when bees are flying. You're going to want to wait, till, late in the day or early in the morning. But you also want to look at the label to find out what the pre-harvest interval is. So that is the time when you spray or treat and the time that you can harvest. And so even, these like spinosad, that is also, that has a 1 to 7 pre-harvest interval, depending on what the crop is. So, broccoli, you may have to wait longer, type things like that. But then there are several things that have a 0 PHI. So neem oil, horticultural oil, insecticidal soap, and pyrethrins, they have a 0 PHI. So you can treat, your vegetable and harvest it in the same day. So these are important things to, want to know. So in summary, your IPM program begins now. You want to start off with healthy plants. So choosing the healthy plants, finding a reputable place to get seed or to buy plants is really important. Keeping those plants healthy. There was something I just read today by another horticulture educator in Lancaster County, and she was talking about keeping plants healthy, starting off really good, making sure, things are irrigated, that they're mulched properly, good sanitation, things like that. But you want to scout early and be thorough, know where to look. You want to confirm identification of that particular pest. You want to use the available tools and resources. Again, contact your local extension office. And consider all those components of an integrated approach, because it doesn't have to be as frustrating. There's a lot of different things that you can do. And you want to document this. You want to document the pests, the damage that it caused one year, the IPM practices that you employed, and what you got out of harvest. Because insects, they are sort of on a cycle. They will be back, right? You plant that again, they will be back. So what you did the year before or what you are going to do in the future really depends on you documenting this, so next year you can get them. And I have to say that when I helped out and we started picking those eggs off of the squash plants for squash bugs, from 2019 to 2020, I believe the harvest for squash increased 300%. So we can always do better, or at least keep it, very competitive, so we can manage these pests. I just want to talk about some of the resources that I use. So I have this book here, which is called The Handbook of Vegetable Pests. I also like the Garden Insects of North America to just look at, you can see pests and all types of insects that you'll find in the garden here. And there are, we do something called the Grow Big Red virtual learning series. And they're also on YouTube, and there is a good one that's about starting seeds and choosing plants and planting your garden. It's got a lot of stuff about weather, when to plant, how to choose your plants. It's really great. John Porter from our office presented that. There's also a fruit, if you're into fruit trees, there's a fruit spray schedule for homeowners. And I can send all these links to Brianna, who could pass these along. But in terms of things like keeping insects in the garden beneficials, there are different guides on how to know your natural enemies and how to keep them in the garden, so we can have this all as this one big ecosystem. And that's how I'm going to end it. If you have any questions, here's my information. My email address is available, so you can feel free to email me if you have any questions or follow-up.
Oh, that was so fantastic. Thank you so much. We have quite a few questions, so I'll get into it. Chris asked, can you treat your soil to help stop some of these pests that overwinter before planting, and how?
It depends which ones you're asking for, but normally when it comes to soil, like if you're talking about grubs treatment, I don't think there's anything labeled for that. And so that would probably be off label, and you wouldn't want to use probably a systemic because you're planting food there.
Awesome. And Martin asked, are grasshoppers and ant larvae considered a pest?
So ant larvae is not. Usually you're going to have ants in the garden, and they can't really do anything. They're being fed by the adults. Grasshoppers can be a pest. Oftentimes they are found living on in the weeds along the sides. So sometimes you might want to mow things around your garden. And with grasshoppers, they can, you'll see holes in the leaf itself because they've got the chewing mouth parts. So they can become pests in the garden. and it's really hard to get rid of those without some kind of treatment or insecticide treatment, but you would want to focus a lot of your management on the outside of the garden where the weeds are.
Awesome. So we have a couple more questions. I am going to throw the poll up here for you guys to answer. It's short again, and we really appreciate you guys filling it out. But Jennifer asked, when scouting for pests, can you use a few sticky traps to see what you catch?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are yellow sticky traps. I don't know, bugs love yellow. So maybe, you know, if we had bugs, they would like me too, but there are yellow sticky traps that you can buy, and a lot of flying insects are really attracted to those.
And then,
you just have to try not to get stuck to them. Like the sticky traps that I have in here, they say that they're specific for outdoor use, so that they're rain proof, and the glue is a certain, I guess, certain kind of thing, and it's kind of covered. So
awesome. And going off of that, someone asked, I've heard the Japanese beetle pheromone traps can actually make things worse. It might actually attract more beetles in your yard than normally. Is that true?
Yes. So we don't recommend Japanese beetle traps for the regular homeowner. I think the only time it would be beneficial is if you had a huge acreage and you used it away from your most prized or ornamentals. So yeah, I think it's like a 5-mile range that they can be attracted to. And so, in that situation, like a Japanese beetle talk is a whole other talk, because the adults can fly, they're so mobile, and yeah, they're attracted to so many different things, and they do love that beetle trap. So if you were in a competition to collect the most beetles, then use a trap. But if you're trying to protect your plants, don't use a trap near them.
So Jennifer asked, is there a written notes version of your presentation? And I do want to add that I will be sending a follow-up email to all of you, just with all of the information that Jody talked about, and to give you her contact information if you guys have any questions. So that will be thrown your guys' way, just so you're aware of that.
Yeah, I'll put a lot of these resources together. And if you want to, like, I don't know which one is the most helpful, but you know, the recording will be somewhere. So
so if you guys have any last minute questions, now's the time to get them in. But I want to thank you so much, Jody. You are so knowledgeable, and you just blow my mind with your insect knowledge. It's so beautiful. And thank you everybody for coming and hanging out with us tonight and getting your big brain on. I love it. Again, I will be sending a follow-up email, and this webinar is being recorded. So if you missed anything, it'll be on Conservation Nebraska's YouTube in just a few weeks. But other than that, check out our Facebook. We have a bunch of events coming up. And I think we got more questions coming. Okay, sorry, I get off on the chat. Julie asked, putting down straw or barrier in your garden bed to decrease weeds, would this be better or worse for the pests?
So, I mean, it's good for a lot of the health of your plant, to keep the moisture in and things like that. You just want to make sure you clean it up in the fall so that things aren't hiding in it. So mulching is good, but leaving the debris there for too long will just create hiding spots.
Awesome. And Jennifer asked, is there a way to volunteer at any community gardens in Omaha?
Oh, I don't know. So most of ours go through the Master Gardener program, but I would encourage Jennifer to reach out to me. I'll hook her up with somebody that can help, but that's so nice.
I was gonna say, I feel like there's always volunteer help that is needed, especially with gardens, because it can be a lot sometimes. Sarah asked, any ideas for protecting trees from Japanese beetles? They attack my plums and my mom's apples.
Yeah, so when it comes to those, I don't know if systemics work for that, because again, they're they're going to be for food. But hand picking in neem, like neem oil or pyola, so it's a pyrethrin with oil. So some of those products that is allowed to be put on fruit trees, but it would probably require, multiple applications and very early when that you start seeing them. So start scouting early and picking them off. And then that's when you can probably do at least 2 sprays, but you can use, neem oil.
Oh, I love it. And people are throwing some volunteer ideas in the chat, so I'll make sure to put those in the email too. If any of you want to volunteer at any community gardens, it's always a fun time. So if there's any last minute questions, get them in there. We'll give you a couple of seconds to get your fingers moving. But otherwise, again, thank you so much, Jody. You are absolutely incredible. And thank you everybody for coming to learn about our integrated pest management. We love it. All right. And there's a lot of love in the chat box for you. Everybody's saying thank you. You rock.
Well, thank you everyone for, spending your Wednesday night here.
Yes. All right. Well, have a good night, everybody. Stay warm and don't get wet outside.